Hey everyone, this is a quick screencast overview of class number 8. You should be watching this if you were absent or you just want to review what we talked about in class. So today we're looking at a couple of things. This is this video that you're watching. We're going to review the causes of the revolution timeline, to ask some questions about important events. In class we did do a little simulation of the Continental Congress, but I'll fill you in on that when you come back to class. We do some notes on some big events like Lexington and Concord, Battle of Bunker Hill, kind of like the road to revolution, and we talk a little bit about the Declaration of Independence. For your remote assignment this week, you're going to be looking at the Declaration of Independence and some of the major battles of the Revolution. So we're kind of really diving into the American Revolution this week. So I posed this question: what do you think was the most important event on the road to revolution? When was kind of the point in which colonists could no longer turn back? When was it inevitable that they were going to come together and fight? We looked at this image of the Boston Massacre. We talked a little bit about, this was made by Paul Revere, the bias in it, and some of the events that happened there. We also talked a little bit about the Boston Tea Party, why they chose to do tea, mainly because it was a symbol of the British, and it was truly showing, we're dumping you, we're getting rid of you. And just to note, this is what tea looked like back then. It wasn't little tea bags like we think of today. You put it in your cup and steep it. They would break off a little piece of this big brick of dried tea and then make tea out of it. We talked a little bit about the Intolerable Acts from 1774. These were put in place after the Boston Tea Party, and the British called them the Coercive Acts, but New England called them the Intolerable Acts because they hated them so much. And they hated them because they thought it was going to take away their representative governments, which was really what they were asking for, was to be involved in the process of governing. The First Continental Congress was when the committees of correspondence in several colonies called for a meeting to discuss the Intolerable Acts. So essentially, this is the first time all of the colonies are coming together to meet. And in September 1774, the First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia. The Congress had 56 delegates from each of the colonies except Georgia, and they were really trying to figure out, they're debating the best way to respond to the crisis taking place in Boston. Are we going to fight a war? So in class, we did a little simulation, giving students the chance to kind of see what they would think taking on the role of one of the states, but you don't really need to worry about that. Lead up to the battles of Lexington and Concord, there was increased military presence in Boston as a result of the Boston Tea Party, and Thomas Gage was a military governor of Massachusetts in order to capture the leaders, John Hancock and Sam Adams, in Lexington and disarm the rebels in the countryside town of Concord. So he's pretty much the guy that's in charge of the British. The colonial militia is originally organized to defend settlers from the civil unrest and attacks by the French or the Native Americans, but now they're taking on the role of fighting the British. The Minutemen were the elite members of the militia who could be ready to fight in a minute's time. And William Dawes and Paul Revere get the news of the night of April 18, 1775, that the British troops were coming by boat to Cambridge, then by horse to Lexington and Concord. So this is one of the famous midnight rides. Some of you probably heard this before. Revere gives instructions to send a signal to Charleston by using lanterns hung in the highest point of Boston's North Church. So that's the church down there. And one lantern would mean that the British had arrived by land. Two lanterns would mean the British had arrived by sea. One if by land, two if by sea. And by sea, they really mean the Charles River. Revere warns nearly every house along his route from Charleston to Lexington. And the myth is that Revere was shouting, "The British are coming." He was really just, talking to people and letting them know it's coming. The reason this is a myth is because this would have confused Americans living in the countryside who still considered themselves to be British, called them regulars instead. In the battle in Lexington, this is just really giving you the highlights here. On April 19, 1775, at 2 a.m., British troops leave Cambridge and head to Lexington first and then to Concord. When they arrive, 77 colonial militiamen are waiting, and a British major yelled, "Throw down your arms, ye villains, ye rebels." And the Minutemen had been ordered to disperse when a shot rang out. So this is referred to as the shot heard around the world. It's unknown who let off the first shot, whether it was the British or the Minutemen, but this is the first shot of the American Revolution. 8 Lexington men were killed and 10 were wounded, and the British troops moved onward to Concord, not realizing that the majority of arms had already been relocated, so they were looking for weapons. The Minutemen arrived at Concord's North Bridge, which was being defended by the British soldiers, and the British fired first, but turned back when colonists returned fire, and the British began to retreat towards Boston. 2,000 Minutemen fire at the British on their way back, and the Minutemen killed 250 redcoats on their retreat. And this is an image of what this battle probably looked like. And the reason this battle is so important, this first battle of the American Revolution, is that it proved they could stand up to one of the most powerful armies in the world. These little colonists were standing up and, holding their own. The moment of these events pushed both sides farther apart, and it led to other battles in the Revolution, including the Battle of Bunker Hill that happened in Boston. The next real battle between the British and the Minutemen, the British forced attack and took over the hill. It actually didn't happen on Bunker Hill; it happened on Breed's Hill, which was next door. But it's another major battle happening here in the Boston area. After this, we have the Second Continental Congress. This is another meeting in Philadelphia in May 1775. And what they're really looking at here is how would the colonists address the military threat of the British? Because at this point, it's inevitable that they're going to fight. They choose George Washington to command the Continental Army, and the Second Continental Congress assumed the normal functions of a government, appointing ambassadors, issuing paper currency, raising the Continental Army through a draft. Essentially, this is our first government. This is our first federal government in the colonies. And they put together what's called the Olive Branch Petition, that pleaded with King George III to attempt a peaceful revolution. This is the last time they're really going, please, 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 we don't want to fight, but you're giving us no options. They're still trying to make peace Britain. Thomas Paine, around the same time, wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense, which was literally just an argument to convince people to join the revolution. It worked because he wrote it in plain language that people could easily understand. So people were reading this pamphlet saying, join the revolution, get away from the British, and they agreed. So Thomas Paine was really successful in getting a lot of people, to get on the side of the revolutionaries, not on the side of the people who are loyal to Britain or the loyalists. After meeting for more than a year, the Continental Congress agreed to declare the independence from Britain, and Thomas Jefferson was the one who would write the Declaration of Independence, which was adopted on July 4th, 1776, the reason we celebrate 4th of July. And so in your remote assignment, you're going to take a look at this Declaration of Independence and some of the pieces that put together. Your remote assignment this week is all about Declaration of Independence and some of the battles of the Revolution. So please be sure to reach out if you have any questions. Other than that, that's just my short overview of what class looked like this day.